I think participatory journalism is critically important because the word participatory invites the idea that you are asking people whose stories you are looking to lift up or share
Mhm.
to be involved in some level in that process. The first step being, what are their goals? What are their needs? And how
Mm.
can this media making process help meet those needs?
Welcome to the Storycraft podcast for storytellers. I'm your host, Meg Adams, and I'm here to help you explore how stories shape our connections. Wondering how stories help you network in advance? Looking to bridge online and face-to-face worlds, foster understanding, and ignite innovation? Look no further. Whether you're a leader, communicator, educator, or just love a good story, join us for actionable insights and real talk with professional storytellers, all aimed at helping you build stronger, better connections.
So, Jessica, I'm so glad to just honestly tickled to be here with you today. I've been waiting for this conversation with you. But before we start, I like to give all of our listeners context. So, could you tell us briefly about your career as a storyteller, where you started to where you are today?
Sure. Um, I started as an activist in college, and I was very engaged with a lot of international initiatives, in particular around South Africa, around Nicaragua, around El Salvador. This was a long time ago. And because I was pretty fearless, would be a spokesperson over and over about what we were doing and why. And I consistently had pretty bad experiences with journalists. I couldn't get them to cover our issues. If I did, they didn't cover them in the ways that we understood ourselves to be working. The quotes were out of context, like all of those things. And so it became really clear to me, Meg, that I needed myself and the organizations I was working with. If we wanted to tell our story, we had to do it ourselves. And this was before cell phones and YouTube. So it was a big deal to like figure out how to do this. So I got involved with public access television and community radio. I started learning how to make my own radio and TV. I started making my own radio and TV. And I just discovered how validating and uplifting and powerful it was to bring people together to figure out what it is we wanted to say and how and to whom, and then do it. And then I started teaching people. I started making scrappy documentaries. I started teaching people how to make their own documentaries. I started doing that here in my home state of California, then across the country here in the US, and then eventually around the globe in different, mostly in Africa, but in Europe and South America. And along the way, what I could say is that I just started really seeing with all the technological changes, I just started really seeing how over and over again, um, when people feel seen and heard, they their lives and communities and sense of what's possible expands,
Mm.
and that the people on the other side of them who are willing to listen actively gain such a different understanding and perspective. And sometimes that ends up, in the best situation, creating both personal and community change. So that's kind of my brief overview of how I came to be in this world of participatory media.
I love that. And for our listeners, could you define participatory media for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think about participatory media as, well, let me just say there's a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different titles for this kind of work. There's
Hmm.
people powered
Yes.
media, audience involved media, community
Yes.
media, citizen journalism. I like to use the phrase participatory media, because it really signals making media with and for communities, not just about them. And when I talk about participatory media, the way I often define it as selecting and developing stories in conversation with the communities most affected, by the story. designing a reporting or media making process that generates understanding, connection, and trust,
Mhm.
not just products, stories,
Mhm.
socials, print, whatever it is. Um, and strengthening the existing networks and making new alliances that end up building community resilience beyond the media making process. So those are kind of the three bullet points to me that sum up that participatory journalism is about creating kind of a mutually beneficial storytelling process where the makers and the storytellers come together and co-create something that is going to have benefits all around.
Thank you so much. That was a great way to define participatory media. And I appreciate you explaining some of the terms that are often used to describe it, because I don't when you talk to people, depending on what the term is, that could change the way that they think about a project or a piece of media. Is there any particular project that you've worked on that really stands out to you as one where this approach was successful, or one that just makes you, as you look back on it, feel really, really good?
Yeah, I would say the project that pops into my head, there are many, but the one that just kind of jumped to me is a documentary film project, really, called Maquilopolis City of Factories, directed by Vicky Funari and Sergio de la Torre. And I can give you links to that afterwards. And this was a project in which we collaborated with three community or three international organizations and a group of women to tell the story of globalization and being on the front lines of globalization through the eyes and experiences of factory workers in Tijuana, Mexico.
Wow, I'm gonna have to. You said it's available on the internet, so we can look it up, and I'll definitely link that in the show notes for our listeners. So
Yeah, it's on
that sounds
PBS.
incredible.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
on PBS Point of View. There's
Mhm.
educator guides. There's in you could go deep in learning a lot about it. And yeah.
So tell me about, you said something earlier too. Some of the point of this type of storytelling or media making, it affects both the storytellers themselves, right? There's a change involved for them, and also hopefully the recipients of the story. So, can you tell us how, in your mind, storytelling can bridge perspectives? So, what's the potential here in a project like that one for not just, you know, tangible change, but also change, that personal development in sharing their story, and someone sharing their story and knowing that it's going to be received on such a large to
Yeah.
a large audience.
Yeah, let me see if I can distill that because it's quite a big question for this
Hmm.
particular project. So the Machilopolis City of Factories project, we involved a group of promotoras. This is a model, a public
Hmm.
health model or a community
Hmm.
health model that looks to bring in people from a community to learn about and to develop their leadership skills, their communication skills, and engage and involve their communities in identifying issues and putting forward solutions to the places they live. And so we worked with a group of promotoras, all women, through one of our partners called Factor X for the X chromosome. Um, and we worked with these women, and they not only we worked with these women and we did community media workshops, and those
Hmm.
were what I planned and did a large part of leading.
Hmm.
And in those community workshops, they would learn how to um, they 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 worked with us to bring their experiences together with ours, I would say is a better way
Hmm.
to frame it, to really explore their key issues and needs their experiences and what kind of changes they felt needed to happen, and how to use camcorders to record that.
Mhm.
And in the process, I would say a couple of things happened. Um, on a personal level, these women who didn't necessarily know each other or know each other well bonded and became a community of ongoing support. And that level is a very important level if you're working
Mhm.
at in a community setting where you are working, 12 to 15 hours a day, you've got a couple of kids, you're barely surviving. That network is critical.
Oh, yeah.
The second is that they felt a sense of agency over their lives, that they
Mhm.
were able to document environmental abuses, labor abuses, and not it's not they bring it out of not just this is happening to me or people around me, but
Mhm.
this is something that is happening that needs to be changed, and I can document it.
Mhm.
Some of the promotoras sneaked cameras in and literally documented abuses.
Mm.
That they had that agency. Then the next level is they took that material with us and their organizations to hold those factories to account legally.
Mhm.
So in one case, one of the promotoras was able to stop a factory from dumping their batteries in their neighborhood that was creating leakages that was getting into their water and basically deforming and harming kids, especially, but other folks. Another was able to challenge labor rights and get different rights from another factory. So it kind of went from
Mhm.
support group um, to personal agency to I can actually get out there and make a change,
Mhm.
which then circles back to how they feel about being parents and raising their kids, how they feel about when when their sweatshops all close down and move from Mexico to China, what skills, abilities they have. Um, so those are some ways in which I think this kind of participatory media makes a change from individual to community to systemic. To get to your question, I think you had another question about bridging, and maybe I can
Yeah.
take next.
Yeah. So that question would be, when we see this type of media, we hear, as I would say, the word authentic kind of is tricky for me, but we get
Yeah.
as close to that story as we can from
Yeah.
from that person at that time. And then those types of stories, like you said, are on PBS and they get seen by a wider audience. So what are the benefits for the recipients of those stories who may not have, like you were talking about globalization, who may not be able to affect the change in that particular community, but are now aware, sensitive, empathetic to the plights of these workers?
So I love this question, and I love for me where it comes from, which is what I hear is um, how do we create storytelling projects that don't just benefit audiences who may be very different from the people in that the media is
Yeah.
made with or
Mhm.
about.
Mhm.
And what I would say about that, Meg, is that that's why I think participatory journalism is critically important because the word participatory invites the idea that you are asking people whose stories you are looking to lift up or share
Mhm.
to be involved in some level in that process. The first step being, what are their goals? What are their needs? And how
Mm.
can this media making process help meet those needs? I think if that's not part of the conversation, then the possibilities for the media making process to be extractive, harming, or at best, um, unuseful and
Yeah.
irrelevant. to the people whose stories you are telling
Mhm.
grows. So I think the first thing is you need to, I recommend taking a participatory approach, involving people from the jump in what it is that they need and want. Secondly, what will make it safe and motivating for them to be involved. For example, I can tell you my goals, but if I don't have childcare, I can't be a
Yeah,
part of this.
right.
Or if we can't meet in the evenings, or if I don't get a stipend. One of the issues a lot in journalism has been, well, you don't pay your sources. Well, that then means that you as the journalist are getting paid, right?
Yeah.
But you are taking other people's time, emotional labor, and stories, and you're making money off of it. That's kind of the definition, of extraction,
Mhm.
or manipulation. Well, extraction, I would say. So I think
Sure.
it's important to ask that question. And then that's where I think it's important to design the process, the reporting process, so that it generates, um, understanding, connection, and trust, right? On
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
so if you're asking people and involving them in what it is they want, need, what will keep it safe and comfortable, and you design the process in part to meet those, then you also can get better to the second half of your question is authenticity. That
Mhm.
you build trust when you show that you care about people and that you have their best interests at heart, and that you are going to give them some agency and power in sharing basically the editorial process.
Mhm.
That opens up trust, it signals care, it gives people a chance to feel like they can be most vulnerable and tell you what's really on their mind and heart, which is what you were saying, what's very authentic, and that they have some control over how that's going to be used so that they
Mhm.
won't be harmed and that they will benefit from it. I think that creates the most compelling, nuanced, accurate, and actionable stories. And those kinds of stories, those are the driveway moments, as
Yeah.
NPR would call them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a virtuous circle.
Yeah. I love that.
Um,
Yeah. I love the metaphor of a circle, Jessica, and this like giving and receiving of stories. And as you're talking, I come from a journalism background. So being a broadcast journalist, sort of understanding where where in that system you're kind of caught, right? Because you have
yes.
and I remember being really frustrated as a journalist and having like a minute 30 seconds to
Oh,
tell a story. And you
right.
and so I loved being able to, in the next step of my career, be able to have that space and that time to not only sit with people longer and encourage them, but to be able to share that story from their viewpoint in the context, that it needed, which is really difficult to do, even with all of the media that we have. You're talking about complex systems and made up of individual stories, right? With all their nuances and
100%.
yeah.
Love what you're hearing on this podcast? Consider booking me to speak at your next event. Dive further into the transformative power of storytelling with my keynote. Tell better stories, speak up, stand out, and build community. In a world that often amplifies our differences, my talk invites you to embrace genuine connections. Break free from the echo chambers and discover the art of storytelling. Learn how to share your own narrative, listen actively, and foster communities that flourish on shared experiences. Check out the show notes to learn more about how to book a talk for your next event.
So I wonder, is it possible, you're talking about using participatory media to build communities in journalism. Could corporations and organizations use this as well to build, a more the term I keep coming back to is like psychologically safe culture and community within. Have you done any or seen any of that work?
Yeah, 100%. My answer to your question is what will work in and with communities, especially communities who've been on the downside of power, who have been historically harmed or overlooked, will work seamlessly in organizations.
Hmm.
Our organizations are collectives of people,
Sure.
enacting a
Yeah.
shared mission where they are microcosms
Hmm.
of communities. So
Hmm.
um I think that you can absolutely use a participatory media or a participatory communications process in a corporate setting for storytelling or even to create a culture of care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, you know, I think that we end up build. I guess what I would say is that in the in the 30 plus years I've been doing community storytelling around the world, participatory community
Mm-hmm.
storytelling work, what I've come to understand is that everything hinges on trust.
Yeah.
Just everything
All
hinges on
relationships.
trust.
That's true. Yeah.
And here's the thing, the the most effective and powerful way to build trust is by showing care. Eh, You know, you caring about people's perspectives and concerns, not necessarily agreeing with them, but caring. Caring about their experiences and joys and struggles. Again, not necessarily that you have to agree or
Mm-hmm.
that is yours.
Mm-hmm.
um, and and caring about a process that will show them dignity and be fair and transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, um, is easy to understand if you're a journalist, but I also think it's easy to understand if you're a project manager or a team leader,
Mm-hmm.
because you're both, in both cases, you are um, bringing people together, creating an atmosphere where people feel safe, supported, and motivated to do their best and to be honest and frank with themselves and each other, and able to co-create with you a process to get there. In journalism, it's a storytelling process, but in other situations, public relations or higher education, um, or even state government,
Mm-hmm.
it's still looking at this group as a community,
Mm-hmm.
and how
Absolutely.
can you care for them in ways that they really see and feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And I promise you, when I talk to people now, because I just put out this guide around care and storytelling, people people can tell you what signals arise for them when they feel cared for.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
can tell you very clearly. And so you can figure out, those, and we can get into that, but and
Mm-hmm.
so you can figure out, how do I build into my workflow when I'm designing the team meetings, when I'm chairing the team meetings, in the note taking that I circle back to people on, in how I do my one-ones. There's just all sorts of levels at which you can think about, how do I help people feel, as you said, psychologically safe, or that we create what's called braver spaces so that people can do their best work and feel supported. It The challenge I'll bring up in all of this, which you probably know and talk to people about, is that it takes time and intention.
Yeah.
And we're often in these workflows that don't make for time, which makes it hard to hold on to that
Mm-hmm.
intention. We have habits, that we've either inherited or are ingrained in our cultures about going fast, doing things a certain way, who gets to make choices. Um, and we also don't often have opportunities to build those skills. So I think there are mindsets and skill sets that we can build and embrace, and help others build and embrace, that will ultimately help create safer spaces, be able to do more bridging,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and help people do their best work, whether it's in a community storytelling outside the building, oops, or inside the building.
Yeah. No, I love that answer because I think that and so my next question sort of builds off of that next one and maybe just gets a little more digs into that a little more. What are some of those strategies for leaders, whether that's on a community storytelling project? Because I can see this again with a journalist. How can you practice this care? And how about but leaders and like you said, project managers? What are some of the Are there any basic things that they can do to create these communities, both, where they live and where they work?
Yeah. Um,
Or I guess another way to think of that, Jessica, would be to encourage, story exchange, right? To encourage that safety, that caring community, that trust. Because I think that does predicate storytelling, right? You can't, and if it
Totally.
doesn't, sometimes, like you said, that'll completely backfire. If you're
Yeah.
vulnerable and
Oh my
somebody
gosh.
misuses it, mistreats it. And there's, like you've said, I mean, I think about not just workplaces, but community contexts where there's been long histories of that too, right? You add that in there, right? We've got all those contexts. So how can we be better? How can we create these spaces?
Right. So here are three ideas that come to mind that I think translate everywhere. Which is the first is, um, when you're bringing people together, um, either in person or virtually. It's easier in person.
Hmm.
Um, how can you pick a place and a space and a time that signals welcoming and care? Right? So if you're in
Hmm.
a community setting, what are the people you're trying to bring together? What's going to work best for them? Where are they going to be comfortable? If it's in person, can you go to where they are? Is it accessible? Is there going to be food? Is there translation? Is it comfortable? Like all the things that you can do so when people walk in the door, they feel like they belong, like
Mm.
this is a space they are familiar with, which helps them settle their nervous systems, that there are cues, visual cues, whether they're tablecloths from the cultural community that they're
Mm.
from, or music or food or art or a co-facilitator, these all of these cues that
Yes.
make people
Yeah.
feel like, oh, this space is actually for me,
Right. Yeah.
and I feel instantly better here.
Hmm.
So, and if you're going to do that virtually, there might be things that you do as well with your background, with your music, with your co-facilitator. So those kind of translate. How do you like
Hmm.
pick a space, place, um, and staffing that is reflective and accessible and settling for the people you're trying to bring in the room? You can translate at that, I think, also to your staff. If it's just your
Hmm.
staff and
Hmm.
you then are going to work with them over time, how do you learn about them? How do you bring other parts of their lives and worlds into the mix, not asking them to, but you do that work? So they
I
walk in
love
and they're
that.
like,
Yeah.
oh, how did you
Yeah.
know I was Portuguese? This music is photo music. That happened to me
Yeah.
once. I was playing
Yeah.
this music and these Portuguese folks like, you're playing photo. How do you know about photo? I'm like, because I did a little research and this is a
Yeah.
Portuguese community
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's the music of the working class. I mean, just all of a sudden they just thought they
Yeah.
just had a different relationship to me.
I love
Um,
that.
so that's
Yeah.
one thing you can do. A second thing you can do, um, is when you get people in the room, you make space for them to get to know each other on a personal level,
Mm.
um, including why they're in the room. So again, if it's in a community setting, this is often in the introductions. Go beyond like name, affiliation,
Hmm.
like go way beyond that, because that's not a personal connection. That does give people a sense of who's in the room, but you
Hmm.
want to ask questions like, what brought you here today? Of all the things you could be doing, what got you to say yes? Or you can be more creative and ask people to come with like a pocket-sized object from their home that
Oh.
reflects something that's really important to them at this moment. And
Hmm.
everybody has 2 minutes to go around and share their object and why. All of a sudden, you're getting a real sense of who's in the room. Or you
Yeah.
might use something like your name um, any story that you can tell us about your name. So, for example, my name is Jesikah Maria Ross, and I'm named that because I'm Jewish and Italian, and my family wanted to make sure that that was reflected. Both sides were reflected in my name because when my
Mhm.
parents got married, Jews weren't considered white, and it was a big deal to have interfaith marriages, and that really informs who I am. I
Mhm.
don't quite say all that, but just that I'm kind of having this gentle way of sharing with people my identity and my
Yeah.
history. And
Yeah.
I can then learn about other people. So make space for people to connect on a personal level, often through sharing personal stories. And there's a
Mm.
bunch of prompts you can use. And you could do that in your staff settings too,
Yeah, I'm
right?
thinking, yes,
So
absolutely.
these are
Yeah.
translational, right,
Uh-huh.
between
Yes,
community, and you can do it
absolutely.
online or in real life.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
the last one I would say that's super important is to involve the group in setting kind of guidelines um, for the work together,
Mm.
or rules of engagement, if that is a way to state it that's better in your situation,
Yeah.
or community agreements. But basically, what you're saying is, hi, I'm Jesikah Maria Ross, and I'm so glad to be here. We're going to be working together for the next week, month, year on this project. And to get going, um, to do our best work, let's set some initial, you know, guidelines for what's going to help us do our best work. And
Mm.
in particular, what can I, as the lead on this project, know and understand and facilitate so that you feel supported and motivated? And you could really
Yeah.
dig in. Again, a lot of
Yeah.
it is in the prompts.
Mhm.
And this is going to be different for if you're going to do like a listening session as
Right. Oh, yeah.
in journalism, to if
Right.
you're going to lead a project and a team in your corporation for the year.
Mhm.
And you could do it, and you could make it a living document and update it. But all of those things, Mag, really signal to people that you care. And what's going to make it work over and over again is if you, two things, these are super important. The first is if you document it and share it back in some way,
Okay.
right? It's not
Yes.
just enough to say, I gotcha, I hear
Oh,
you.
yeah.
And it's not only enough, I think, to write it on the whiteboard or on your flip chart. You
Mhm.
actually should make something that you send back to people or bring back to the next meeting that says, this is what I heard. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Mhm.
And I often use that for a next session to say, what would these things actually look like? Just so I'm clear. I have a sense. I've had the chance to lead projects, but I've never led a project with this group or within this particular situation or at this particular historic moment, like when I
Mhm.
did stuff during COVID or right after
Mhm.
COVID. I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
everything was
Right.
different.
Right.
So you go back to them and say, what would this actually look like? And then I often make a visual and I have it up. I bring it to every meeting so it's there. We can add to it, we can cross stuff off of it. And here's the interesting thing: most of the time, halfway through the project, things people ask for at the beginning, they no longer ask that. They're like, you can let go of that. Because
Yeah.
I just had, this brings me to the second point. The first is you have a feedback loop, right? You
Mhm.
document it, you show it, you tell them what you heard, you ask for corrections and additions, and if you can make time, ask for examples.
Mhm.
And then the second one is you live it. And every time you do something that harkens back to something they asked for, you are like, pull the curtain back.
Mhm.
Usually I do this verbally. So something's
Mhm.
happening in the room and I do something and I just say, like, let me just pause and say, what I just did may have felt uncomfortable. I know it was uncomfortable to me, but you asked for this and I'm trying to make sure that we got that. How did that work for people? How did I do? Like, you like break the fourth wall and you say, every time you are doing something that they ask for, you make a point of it. And basically, this is a trust building activity because the reason most people have a lot of guidelines, how can I say this? I guess what I would say is people put stated guidelines up because they want to be sure that they get their needs met.
Mhm.
The more they know you're going to meet those needs, the less they need to see it and the more trusting they are, which is why, pro tip, if you go back and work with partners and communities over time, that shortens the collaboration hugely because they know what you stand for and what you're good
Mhm.
for. Yeah.
Oh, I love that answer. I feel like I'm just gonna, when I edit, it's just, I'm just gonna have to pause and write that all down. Hopefully, our listeners are doing that. But what a beautiful approach, because not only does it, collaboratively allow people to create the community in which they want to work and thrive, like together you're creating that, but you're also attaching actions, right? And you are the one making those apparent, right? You're leading that, okay, well, we're going to do this because of this. And then as you mentioned, I think it's one of those things where it seems like, I'm guessing for most people, the reaction might be, well, that feels like it would be a lot of work up front. But with the caveat that once you have built trust and people feel, like we said, safe, and then the needs are being met, and we don't need to make this so visible, well, then that's when the wheels get turning. That's when you innovate. That's when create solutions to a lot of the problems that we are facing. I mean, I can think of that again, community wide, but also company or organizationally wide, which, like you said, is a microcosm of community. But yeah, I love those tips because they are very, to me, like practical and achievable.
Okay, we had to pause the podcast to let you in on this opportunity. If you're ready to elevate your brand storytelling, don't miss our training, Tell Better Stories, led by me, a seasoned television journalist and PR professor, and Kyle, an on-air meteorologist and video storytelling expert. This workshop unveils our secrets to craft compelling, personal-driven narratives that resonate with your audience. Learn our distinct approach that puts people first and brands second, leveraging 6 storytelling elements for maximum impact. Walk away with actionable strategies, tactics, and a clear process to replicate success in any organization. Check out the show notes to learn more about this offer or reach out to homeplacecreative@gmail.com.
Absolutely. If you're in a journalism context, you know this idea
Mhm.
of pre-production.
Yes,
Like, and from broadcast
absolutely.
and video, like we used to learn like every hour of pre-production saves you 4 hours in the
Yeah,
edit was like
that's
the
true. Oh,
formula,
so true. I say that all the time. It's
right?
true.
Well, same
Yeah.
thing. Same thing
Yeah.
about building trust, right?
Yeah.
And also this idea of slower is faster. If you
Mhm.
slow down at the beginning and are intentional, and I don't mean go glacially, but
Right.
I mean you have to figure out like what is the speed of trust for this group. And
Exactly.
it's going to be
Yeah.
different in a corporate or
Mhm.
team setting, or I should say in a setting where you're already working together.
Mhm.
You might be able to go a little faster, but usually there are like invisible lines and like landmines that you need to kind of
Sure.
lift up
Yeah.
and let go
Yeah.
of. And
Yeah.
that's always the case in communities for sure.
Mhm.
I also want to just mention, I love that you'll write these things down. I can tell you that I have 2 guides, a participatory journalism playbook and also this new one on taking care, and I can share those with you because it kind of gives you actual practical, tactical examples.
I love, thank you. Thank you for that generosity. That sounds lovely. I'd love to have those and let listeners know where they can get those too.
Great.
That's, thank
I
you.
will send them to you after the chat.
Thank you. That's amazing. So I can't believe like our time together is sped by. So we do have a few sort of like rapid fire questions at the end that I ask everybody. These are
Sure.
fun.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So first one is, what is your favorite story of all time? Could be in any form, movie, documentary, song, book. You have a favorite or favorites? A
Favorite
series?
story. Favorite story of all time.
It's a big one too.
That
What
that
do
is
we need to check out? Like, what are we missing, you know?
Favorite story. Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to think of a favorite that I love. And I'm just going to look at my bookshelf and see if there's things that give me examples. It's hilarious how I'm finding that a challenging
It
question.
is. It's a super challenging question. Or maybe, another way that I've asked this to people is right now. Like what are you enjoying right now?
Yeah. Um, I think I- um so a book that I am enjoying right now, I am rereading it, is Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm enjoying that right now is that, and for those who haven't read it, it's
Mhm.
indigenous. It's a series of vignettes from an indigenous botanist and scholar who is looking at natural systems, botanical systems, and their interaction with human systems, and how at the core of that relationship between people and and the environment, I'll say, is generosity and reciprocity. And
Mm,
that for human and natural ecosystems to work best together, there needs to be care and stewardship.
mm,
And of course, that's resonant
yeah.
for me right now because I'm trying to figure out how we do a regenerative form of storytelling where we're building up the ecosystems of our communities so that they can thrive, and seeing our communities as ecosystems so that by building up different pieces, it will, build up the whole ecosystem. And also that if we deplete certain parts of it, we are
Mm,
going to bring the whole system down. So
mhm.
that would be one story I'm really appreciating right now.
I love that. Thank you. You just I piqued my interest. I'm like, I should add that to my stack again. Like that. Yeah, yeah.
Hey,
Thank you for
pro
that.
tip, she is like one of the best readers, and so I listen to it.
Oh,
So I would
nice. Oh,
recommend
that's a good
listening to
idea.
it.
Listening to it. Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Unless
that
you're
is a
like
great
me,
idea.
I like to also underline and
I
write.
do. I know I write things and I know I can't even do the Kindle for certain books because that's why I'm like the handwritten notes to me are
Totally.
still and the sticky tabs.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is what is it's an either or an and. So what's the best piece of storytelling advice you've heard that you just have to let us in on the secret, or the worst piece of advice that you've heard that you want to warn us all about in regards to storytelling?
I think one of the best pieces of advice, it was more like a observation than a piece
Mhm.
of advice. Um, it's from the Maisels brothers. There's this documentary team that did work mostly in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But if you go online, they have a whole institute, the Maisel brothers. And what I think it was uh, I think it was Alfred that said it, but the idea was that when you are making a documentary, you are making a relationship with somebody
Mm,
and documenting that relationship, not trying to tell your story or a story, but that you are really telling the story of your relationship with this person. And that doesn't necessarily mean I didn't understand it to mean that it's a like self-reflective, break the fourth
sure.
wall. type of story. But what it says that I think is so interesting, and I could probably dig up the quote for you because I
Mhm.
think there's a quote about it. But what I think is so beautiful and powerful about it is that inherent in that observation is that storytelling is all about the relationship between the media maker and the
Mhm.
storyteller, and that the emphasis for the most powerful type of story that's going to be mutually rewarding across the board for the storyteller, for the media maker, and for the audience is for the storyteller to see their work as a way of documenting the relationship, the experience, what they're learning as a media maker, what's happening for the storyteller. That journey, however you translate it to the medium of your choice, is going to be what is most powerful, relevant, and meaningful all the way around.
That is a beautiful way of thinking of the process that I hadn't heard before, Jessica. So thank you so much. I love that as well. And then the final question is to define storytelling in your own words.
To define storytelling in my own words, I would define storytelling as the um, act of bringing forward an experience, memory, or hope for others.
Love that. That's beautiful.
I've never thought about that. I better write that down.
I like that you said the act of bringing forward that experience because that really does, I think, embody all of what you've shared with us today in terms of the idea of relationship building, community building, sort of these acts of love that and generosity that our stories are for one another.
Hmm.
So yeah, what a beautiful thing. It has just been a gift to talk to you today. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. And I wanted to also let listeners know where can they find you? How can they connect with you if they want to follow up or learn more about what you do and are doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. I have a website, JesicaMariaRoss.com. And that's Jesikah Maria Ross.com. And so they can find work there. And that's probably the best place. Or if they
Okay.
want to connect with me, they can do it best probably on Instagram. And
Okay.
I am at JMR underscore Media Spark, all one word, at
Beautiful.
JMR Media Spark.
Okay. I will link those. So if you're listening and want to check out the show notes, you can get the links right there.
That
So,
sounds great.
yeah.
We're so glad you've listened to this podcast episode. If you liked it, would you mind doing us a favor? Share this episode with someone who would be interested in the topic too. We're on a mission to help everyone become a better storyteller. And don't forget to subscribe to the show to get updated every time we release a new episode. Each and every episode is produced, hosted, and edited by us, Meg and Kyle Adams at Home Place Creative. Happy storytelling!